Okay, we're here for Module 3 of Enterprise Networking Security and Automation, which is Network Security Concepts. So we're going to look at how vulnerabilities, threats and exploits can be mitigated to enhance network security. And to do that, we're going to look at the current state of cybersecurity. We're going to look at threat actors, malware, common network attacks, IP vulnerabilities and threats, TCP and UDP vulnerabilities, IP services, network security best practices, and cryptography. Okay, so an ethical hacking statement. So in this module, learners may be exposed to tools and techniques in a sandbox virtual machine environment to demonstrate various types of cyber attacks. Experimentation with these tools, techniques and resources is at the discretion of the instructor and local institution. If the learner is considering using attack tools for educational purposes, they should contact their instructor prior to any experimentation. Unauthorized access to data, computer and network systems is a crime in many jurisdictions, often is accompanied by severe consequences, regardless of the perpetrator's motivations. It is the learner's responsibility as the user of this material to be cognizant of a compliant with computer use laws. Okay, so the current state of cybersecurity. Cyber criminals now have the expertise and tools necessary to take down critical infrastructure and systems. Their tools and techniques continue to evolve. Maintaining a secure network ensures the safety of network users and protects commercial interests. All users should be aware of security items in the table. So assets, of course, is anything of value to the organization, includes people, equipment, resources, and data. Vulnerability is a weakness in a system or its design that can be exploited by a threat. A threat is a potential danger to a company's assets, data, or network functionality. An exploit is a mechanism that takes advantage of a vulnerability. Mitigation is the countermeasure that reduces the likelihood or severity of a potential threat or risk. Network security involves multiple mitigation techniques. And then there's risk is the likelihood of a threat to exploit the vulnerability of an asset with the aim of negatively affecting an organization. Risk is measured using the probability of the occurrence of the event and its consequences. So an attack, vectors of networks attacks. And so an attack vector is a path by which a threat actor can gain access to a server, host, or network. Attack vectors originate from inside or outside the corporate network, as shown in the figure. Internal threats have the potential to cause greater damage than external threats because internal users have direct access to the building and its infrastructure devices. So, of course, external threats need to get through your firewall and into compromised hosts and the like, while internal typically don't need to get through the firewall. So that's why there's greater potential. All right, data loss or data exfiltration is when data is intentionally or unintentionally lost, stolen or leaked to the outside world. The data loss can result in brand damage and loss of reputation, loss of competitive advantage, loss of customers, loss of revenue, litigation, legal action resulting in fines and civil penalties, significant cost and effort to notify affected parties and recover from the breach. Network security professionals must protect the organization's data. Various data loss prevention controls must be implemented, which combine strategic, operational, and tactical measures. Okay, so data loss vectors can be via email or social networking. So intercepted email or IM messages could be captured and reveal confidential information. So unencrypted devices, if the data is not stored using an encryption algorithm, then the thief can retrieve valuable confidential data. Cloud storage devices, of course, in someone's data center somewhere, and so it can be data can be lost through that as well. Removable media. So one risk is that an employee could perform an unauthorized transfer of data to a USB drive. Another risk is that a USB drive containing valuable corporate data could be lost. Hard copy, so confidential data should be shredded when no longer required, sorry. Improper access control, so passwords or weak passwords which have been compromised can provide a threat actor with easy access to corporate data. Okay, so threat actors. So the common term of hacker is used to describe a threat actor. And so white hat hackers, these are ethical hackers who use the programming skills for good, ethical and legal purposes. Screening vulnerabilities are reported to developers for them to fix before the vulnerabilities can be exploited. So, of course, the opposite end of the scale, there are black hat hackers, where these are the unethical criminals who compromise computer and network security for personal gain or for malicious reasons such as attacking networks. And of course, somewhere in the middle are the grey hat hackers. And these individuals who commit crimes do arguably unethical things, but not for personal gain or to cause damage. They may disclose a vulnerability to the affected organisation after having compromised their network. Okay, so the evolution of hackers. The table displays modern hacking terms and a brief description of each. And so script kiddies, these are teenagers or inexperienced hackers running existing scripts, tools, and exploits to cause harm, but typically not for profit. So vulnerability broker are those usually grey hat hackers who attempt to discover exploits and report them to vendors, sometimes for prizes or rewards. Hacktivists, these are grey hat hackers who publicly protest organisations or governments by posting articles, videos, leaking sensitive information and performing network attacks. Cyber criminals, they are black hat hackers who are either self-employed or working for large cybercrime organisations. And then there are state-sponsored hackers. And so, of course, that depends on what side of the fence you sit on, whether they're white or black. And so they steal government secrets, gather intelligence and sabotage networks. Their targets are foreign governments, terrorist groups and corporations. Most countries in the world participate to some degree in state-sponsored hacking. Okay, with cyber criminals, it is estimated that cyber criminals steal billions of dollars from consumers and businesses. They operate in an underground economy where they buy, sell and trade attacking toolkits, zero-day exploit code, botnet services, banking trojans, keyloggers and much more. They also buy and sell the private information and intellectual property they steal. Cyber criminals target small businesses and consumers, as well as large enterprises and entire industries. So hacktivists, two examples of hacktivist groups are anonymous and the Syrian Electronic Army. Although most hacktivist groups are not well organised, they can cause significant problems for governments and businesses. They tend to rely on fairly basic, freely available tools. So state-sponsored hackers create advanced, customised attack code, often using previously undiscovered software vulnerabilities called zero-day vulnerabilities. An example of a state-sponsored attack involves the Stuxnet malware that was created to damage Iran's nuclear enrichment capabilities. Very interesting stories about that. Okay, so threat actor tools. So to exploit a vulnerability, a threat actor must have a technique or tool. Over the years, attack tools have become more sophisticated and highly automated. These new tools require less technical knowledge to actually use them. So the evolution of security tools. So the table highlights categories of common penetration testing tools. Notice how some tools are used by white hats and black hats. Keep in mind that this list is not exhaustive as new tools are always being developed. All right, so password crackers. So password cracking tools are often referred to as password recovery tools, can be used to crack or recover a password. Password crackers repeatedly make guesses in order to crack the password. Examples of password cracking tools include John the Ripper, Offcrack, Loftcrack, THC Hydra, Rainbow Crack, and Medusa. Wireless hacking tools, of course, are used to intentionally hack into a wireless network to detect security vulnerabilities. And so examples of the hacking tools include Aircrack NG, Kismet, Insider, Kismac, Firesheep, and Vistumbler. Network scanning and hacking tools. And so these tools are used to probe networks, devices, servers, and hosts for open TCP and UDP ports. Examples of these tools are Nmap, Superscan, Angry IP Scanner, and NetScan tools. Packet crafting tools, and so these tools are used to probe and test a firewall's robustness using specifically crafted forged packets. Examples include HPing, SCAPI, SOCAT, Yersinia, Netcat, NPing, and Nemesis. And then packet sniffers. These tools are used to capture and analyze packets within traditional Ethernet LANs or wireless LANs. Tools include Wireshark, TCP dump, EtherCap, DSNF, EtherApe, Paros, Fiddler, Rat Proxy, and SSL Strip. Okay, so more tools. So there are rootkit detectors, and so this is a directory and file integrity checker used by white hats to detect installed rootkits. Example tools include NetFilter and PF and OpenBSD packet filter. Fuzzers to search vulnerabilities are tools used by threat actors to discover a computer's security vulnerabilities. Examples of fuzzers include Skipfish, Wapiti, and W3AF. Forensic tools. These tools are used by white hat hackers to sniff out any trace of evidence existing in a computer. Example are SleuthKit, Helix, Maltego, and Encase. Debuggers. These tools are used by black hats to reverse engineer binary files when writing exploits. They're used by white hats when analyzing malware. Debugging tools include GDB, WinDBG, IDA Pro, and Immunity Debugger. So hacking operating systems. These are specifically designed operating systems preloaded with tools optimized for hacking. Examples of specifically designed hacking operating systems include Kali Linux and Backbox Linux. Encryption tools use algorithm schemes to encode the data to prevent unauthorized access to encrypted data. Examples of these include VeraCrypt, CipherShed, OpenSSH, OpenSSL, Tor, OpenVPN, and Stunnel. Vulnerability exploitation tools. These tools identify whether a remote host is vulnerable to a security attack. Examples of vulnerability exploitation tools include Metasploit, Core Impact, SQL Map, Social Engineer Toolkit, and NetSparker. So vulnerability scanners, and so they scan a network or system to identify open ports. They can also be used to scan for known vulnerabilities and scan VMs, BYOD devices, and client databases. Examples of these tools include Nipper, Core Impact, Nessus, Saint, and OpenBAS. Okay, so attacking types. So eavesdropping, this is when a threat actor captures and listens to network traffic. This attack is also referred to as sniffing or snooping. Data modification attack is where they've captured enterprise traffic. They can alter the data in the packet without the knowledge of the sender or receiver. IP address spoofing attack. So a threat actor constructs an IP packet that appears to originate from a valid address inside the corporate intranet. Password-based attacks. So if threat actors discover a valid user account, the threat actors have the same rights as the real user. Threat actors could use that valid account to obtain lists of other users, network information, change server and network configurations, and modify, reroute, or delete data. So denial of service attacks prevent normal users of a computer or network by valid users. A DOS attack can flood a computer or entire network with traffic until a shutdown occurs because of the overload. A DOS attack can also block traffic, which results in loss of access to network resources by, again, authorized users. Man in the middle is where when threat actors have positioned themselves between a source and destination, they can now actively monitor, capture, and control the communication transparently. Compromised key attack. If the threat actor obtains a secret key, that key is referred to as a compromised key and can be used to gain access to a secured communication without the sender or receiver being aware of the attack. Then a sniffer attack is an application or device that can read, monitor, and capture network data exchanges and read network packets. If the packets are not encrypted, a sniffer provides a full view of the data inside the packet. Okay, malware. So an overview. Now that you know about the tools that hackers use, this topic introduces you to different types of malware that hackers use to gain access to end devices. End devices are particularly prone to malware attacks. It is important to know about malware because threat actors rely on users to install malware to help exploit security gaps. So the primary vulnerabilities for end user workstations are virus, worm, and Trojan horse attacks. Okay, so viruses and Trojan horses. The first and most common type of computer malware is a virus. Viruses require human interaction to propagate and infect other computers. The virus hides by attaching itself to computer code, software, or documents on the computer. When opened, the virus executes and infects the computer. And so they can alter, corrupt, and delete files or erase entire drives, cause computer booting issues and corrupt applications, capture and send sensitive information to threat actors, access and use email accounts to spread, lay dormant until summoned by the threat actor. Okay, so modern viruses are developed for specific intent, such as those listed in the table. So there are boot sector viruses, and so they insert themselves into the boot sector, the partition table of the file system, and as soon as the computer boots, they can become active. So firmware viruses, so they attack the device firmware. Again, they can operate as soon as the device boots. Macro viruses use MS Office macros to feature to run themselves. Program viruses, of course, attach themselves to executable programs. And then script viruses attack the operating system interpreter, which is used to execute scripts. Okay, so threat actors use Trojan horses to compromise hosts. Trojan horse is a program that looks useful but also carries malicious code. And so Trojan horses are often provided with free online programs such as computer games. There are several types of Trojan horses as described in the table. So there are remote access ones, and so they enable unauthorized remote access. Data sending, so they'll send sensitive data like passwords and such back to the actor. Destructive ones, so it can corrupt or delete files. Proxy, so we'll use the victim's computer as a source device to launch attacks and perform other illegal activities. With FTP, enables unauthorized file transfer services on end devices. Security software disabler, so it will basically stop antivirus programs and firewalls, and so make their attack a little easier. Denial of service, of course, stops valid users from being able to use things. Keyloggers, of course, actively attempt to steal confidential information such as credit card numbers by reading keystrokes entered into a web form. Okay, so other types of malware are adware, ransomware, rootkits, spyware, and worms. So adware is usually distributed by downloading online software, can display unsolicited advertising, pop-up web browser windows, new toolbars, or unexpected redirect web page to a different website. Pop-up windows may be difficult to control as new windows can pop up faster than the user can close them. So ransomware, of course, typically denies a user access to their files by encrypting the files and then displaying a message demanding a ransom for the decryption key. Users without up-to-date backups must pay the ransom to decrypt their files. Payment is usually made using wire transfer or cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin. So rootkits are used by threat actors to gain administrator account level access to a computer. They're very difficult to detect because they can alter firewall, antivirus protection, system files, and even OS commands to conceal their presence. They can provide a backdoor to threat actors, giving them access to the PC, allowing them to upload files and install new software to be used in a distributed denial of service attack. Special rootkit removal tools must be used to remove them, or a complete OS reinstall may be required. So spyware is similar to adware, but used to gather information about the user, and threat actor use without the user's consent. Spyware can be low threat, gathering browsing data, or it can be high threat, capturing personal and financial information. So worms are a self-replicating program that propagate automatically without user actions by exploiting vulnerabilities in legitimate software. It uses a network to search for other victims with the same vulnerability. The intent of a worm is usually to slow or disrupt network operations. Okay, common network attacks. So when malware is delivered and installed, the payload can be used to cause a variety of network-related attacks. To mitigate attacks, it is useful to understand the types of attacks. By categorizing network attacks, it is possible to address types of attacks rather than individual attacks. Networks are susceptible to the following types of attacks, so reconnaissance, access, and denial of service. Okay, so reconnaissance is information gathering. So threat actors use reconnaissance or recon to do unauthorized discovery and mapping of systems, services, or vulnerabilities. Recon attacks precede access attacks or denial of service attacks. So it's normally not the end game, it's the start of the game typically. So some of the techniques used by malicious threat actors to conduct reconnaissance attacks are below. So perform an information query of a target. So the threat actor is looking for initial information from a target. Various tools can be used, including Google search, organization's website, who is, and more. Then you can do a ping sweep of the target network. And so you can reveal the target's network address. The threat actor can now initiate a ping sweep to determine the IP addresses that are active. And you can then do a port scan. So once you know what IP addresses are available, you can then check what ports are available on each of those IPs. And so Nmap, Superscan, Angry IP Scanner, and NetScan tools are often used there. You can run vulnerability scanners. So this is to query the identified ports to determine the type and version of the application or operating system that is running on the host. Examples of tools include Nipper, Core Impact, Nessus, Saint, and OpenVAS. All right, so you can also run exploitation tools. So the threat actor now attempts to discover vulnerable services that can be exploited. A variety of vulnerability exploitation tools include Metasploit, Core Impact, SQL Map, Social Engineer Toolkit, and NetSparker. Okay, so access attacks. So they normally exploit known vulnerabilities in authentication services, FTP, web. And so the purposes of these types of attacks is to gain entry to web accounts, confidential database, and other sensitive information. And so the actors use access attacks on network devices and computers to retrieve data, gain access, and escalate access privileges to administrator status. So password attacks can be used. The threat actor attempts to discover critical system passwords by using various methods. Password attacks are very common and can be launched using a variety of password cracking tools. And so with spoofing attacks, the threat actor device attempts to pose as another device by falsifying data. Common spoofing attacks include IP spoofing, MAC spoofing, and DHCP spoofing. These attacks will be discussed in more detail later. Other attacks include trust exploitation, port redirections, man-in-the-middle, and buffer overflow attacks. So social engineering is an access attack that attempts to manipulate individuals into performing actions or divulging confidential information. Some social engineering techniques are performed in person, while others may use the telephone or internet. Social engineers often rely on people's willingness to be helpful. They also prey on people's weaknesses. Okay, so some of the attacks can be pretexting. Threat actor pretends to need personal or financial data to confirm the identity of the recipient. Phishing is where they send a fraudulent email which is disguised as being from a legitimate trusted source to trick the recipient into installing malware on their device or to share personal or financial information. Spear phishing is basically phishing but targeted at a particular individual or small group of people or an organisation. Spam, of course, is just junk mail, so it's unsolicited, which often contains harmful links, malware, and deceptive content. There are something for something attacks, or quid pro quo. This is when a threat actor requests personal information from a party in exchange for something such as a gift. Baiting is where a threat actor leaves a malware-infected flash drive in a public location. The victim finds the drive and unsuspectingly inserts it in their laptop, unintentionally installing malware. There's impersonation. The type of attack is where a threat actor pretends to be someone they are not to gain the trust of a victim. Tailgating is where a threat actor quickly follows an authorized person into a secure location to gain access to that area. Shoulder surfing is where the threat actor inconspicuously looks over someone's shoulder to steal their password or other information. And then there's dumpster diving. This is where threat actor rummages through trash bins to discover confidential documents. Okay, so there is a social engineering toolkit was designed to help white hat hackers and other network security professionals create social engineering attacks to test their own networks. Enterprises must educate their users about the risks of social engineering and develop strategies to validate identities over the phone, via email, or in person. Figure shows recommended practices that should be followed by all users. So never give your username or password credentials to anyone. Never leave your username, password, credentials where they can be easily found. Never open emails from untrusted sources. Never release work-related information on social media sites. Never use work-related passwords. Always lock or sign out when your computer when you leave it unattended. Always report suspicious individuals, and always destroy confidential information according to the organisational policy. Okay, so with denial of service attacks, they create some sort of interruption to network services, to users, devices, or applications. There are two major types of DOS attacks. So an overwhelming quantity of traffic. So a threat actor sends an enormous quantity of data at a rate that the network, host, or application cannot handle. This causes transmission and response times to slow down. It can also crash a device or service. Or you can have maliciously formatted packets. So they send that packet to a host or application is unable to handle it. This causes the receiving device to run very slow or crash. DOS attacks are a major risk because they interrupt communications and cause significant loss of time and money. These attacks are relatively simple to conduct, even by an unskilled threat actor. And so a DDoS, or distributed DOS attack, is similar to DOS, but originates from multiple coordinated sources. Okay, IP vulnerabilities and threats. So IP does not validate whether the source IP address contained in the packet actually came from that source. For this reason, threat actors can send packets using a spoofed source IP address. Security analysts must understand the different fields in both IPv4 and 6 headers. Some of the more common IP-related attacks are shown in the table. So there's ICMP attacks, which of course is Internet Control Message Protocol. And so echo pings to discover networks and hosts on the protected network. And you can generate denial of service flood attacks. And you can also alter host routing tables. Amplification and reflection attacks. Threat actors attempt to prevent legitimate users from accessing informational services using denial of service. Address spoofing, where threat actors spoof the source IP address in a packet to perform blind spoofing or non-blind spoofing. Man in the middle, of course, is where they position themselves between the source and destination to transparently monitor, capture, and control the communication. They could eavesdrop by inspecting captured packets or alter packets and forward them to their original destination. And then there's session hijacking, where the threat actor gains access to the physical network and then use a man-in-the-middle attack to hijack a session. Okay, so with ICMP, they can launch information gathering attacks to map out a network, discover which hosts are active, identify the host operating system, and determine the state of a firewall. Threat actors also use ICMP for denial of service. And so, yeah, both IPv4 and IPv6 are vulnerable to similar problems. Networks should have strict ICMP access control list, filtering on the network edge to avoid ICMP probing from the internet. In the case of large networks, security devices such as firewalls and intrusion detection systems detect such attacks and generate alerts to the security analysts. All right, so ICMP messages of interest to threat actors are listed in the table below. And so, of course, we've got echo, request, and reply. That's what you use for your ping, of course. You can do ICMP unreachable, again, to perform network reconnaissance and scanning attacks. ICMP mask replies. You can get a map of the internal IP address. You can get redirects. This is used to lure a target host into sending all traffic through a compromised device and create a man-in-the-middle attack. And then there's router discovery, and so used to inject bogus route entries into the routing table of a target host. Okay, so amplification and reflection attacks. Threat actors often use amplification reflection techniques to create denial of service attacks. An example in the figure illustrates a Smurf attack which is used to overwhelm a target host. Note, fewer forms of amplification and reflection attacks, such as DNS-based reflection amplification, are now being used. Threat actors also use resource exhaustion attacks to either crash a host or consume all the resources. So basically, with an echo request, and you make the host the destination, the target the destination, the source, sorry. And then, of course, basically you ping them and then they all reply back to your victim. They can make things busy. Okay, spoofing, of course, is when a threat actor creates packets with false source IP address information to either hide the identity of the sender or to pose as another legitimate user. It's usually incorporated in another attack, such as a Smurf attack. So spoofing can be non-blind or blind. So non-blind spoofing, the threat actor can see the traffic that is being sent between the host and the target. Non-blind spoofing determines the state of a firewall and sequence number prediction. It's also can also hijack an authorized session. So blind is just where the threat actor cannot see the traffic that is being sent between the host and the target. That's used for denial of service. MAC address spoofing attacks are used when threat actors have access to internal network. Threat actors alter the MAC address of their host to match another known MAC address of a target host. Okay, so TCP and UDP. So with TCP, the segment information appears immediately after the IP header. The fields in the TCP segment, the flags for the control bits field are displayed in the figure. So of course, these are what's used for three-way handshake and setup and tear down and things like that. So you got an urgent pointer, acknowledgement, got a push function, reset, SYN and FIN bits are there. So TCP, of course, is designed to give us reliable delivery, flow control, and stable communication. So with reliable delivery is implemented using acknowledgements. If a timely acknowledgement is not received, the sender retransmits the data, requiring acknowledgements of received data that can cause substantial delays. Examples of application layer protocols that can make use of this are, of course, HTTP, SSL, TLS, FTP, DNS zone transfers, and others. Flow control, of course, implements a flow control to address the issue. Rather than acknowledge one segment at a time, multiple segments can be acknowledged with a single acknowledgement. Stateful communication, of course, is you keep track of where you're up to in the conversation, and so you keeping track of the state. All right, so of course the three-way handshake. So of course initiates connection using TCP, and so of course the client or the host opening the connection will send a SYN, as in synchronize, and then the destination will then send a SYN-ACK. And so of course it means it's its own synchronization information as well as acknowledging the synchronization from the original host, and this will then the original host will then send an ACK packet. As you can see, it also does your sequence numbers and things like that, hence the synchronization. Okay, so with a SYN flood attack, the threat actor sends multiple SYN requests to a web server. And so the web server replies to the SYN-ACKs with SYN-ACKs to each SYN packet. And the threat actor never sends a SYN-ACK to close the connection. So basically you can, of course, the web server with all these SYN-ACKs that it's been sent, has to keep track of all of these conversations, and it's using resources. And so a valid user cannot access the web server because too many half-open TCP connections have happened. So basically, back in the old days, if you did this, it just used to use up all the resources that are available, and the server would crash. These days, of course, I've seen the SYN floods before, and so you set a maximum number of half-open TCP connections, and so of course the server won't crash, but of course valid users can't attach because all of the allowance has been used by these attacking SYN packets, and so it still works as a denial of service. It's just that the server will recover from it in modern operating systems, while the old ones are just used to crash. All right, so another possible attack is attacking the FIN packets. So terminating a TCP session takes the following exchanges, and so when the client has no more data to send in the stream, it sends a FIN packet, and so then the server will reply with an ACK, and then it will send its own FIN packet, and the client will respond with an ACK. So a threat actor could do a TCP reset attack and send a spoofed packet containing a reset to one or both endpoints. And so session hijacking is another TCP vulnerability. Although difficult to conduct, a threat actor takes over an already authenticated host as it communicates with the target. The threat actor must spoof the IP address of one host and predict the next sequence number and send an ACK to the other host. If successful, the threat actor could send but not receive data from the target device. Okay, so UDP, of course, the header is a little less complex with UDP because everything's less complex. And so, of course, it's used by DNS for normal queries, TFTP, NFS, and SNMP. It's also used with real-time applications such as VoIP as well, and media streaming. It's connectionless transport layer protocol. It has much lower overhead than TCP because it's not connection-oriented and does not offer the sophisticated retransmission, sequencing, and flow control. These reliability functions are not provided by the transport layer in this case and must be implemented elsewhere if they're required. The low overhead of UDP makes it very desirable for protocols that make simple request and reply transactions, DNS, DHCP, and the like. Okay, so UDP is not protected by any encryption. You can add encryption to UDP, but is not available by default. The lack of encryption means that anyone can see the traffic, change it, and send it to onto its destination. So flood attacks, the threat actor uses a tool like UDP Unicorn or low orbit ion cannon. These tools send a flood of UDP packets, often from a spoofed host, to a server on the subnet. The program will sweep through all the known ports, trying to find closed ports. This will cause the server to reply with the ICMP port unreachable message. Because there are many closed ports on the server, this creates a lot of traffic on the segment, which uses up most of the bandwidth. The result is very similar to a denial of service attack. All right, IP services. So of course there's ARP, and that has vulnerabilities as well. And so of course hosts broadcast an ARP request to other hosts on the segment to determine the MAC address of a host with a particular IP address. The host with the matching IP address in the ARP request sends an ARP reply. Any client can send an unsolicited ARP reply called a gratuitous ARP. When a host sends a gratuitous ARP, other hosts on the subnet store the MAC address and IP address contained in those packet in their ARP tables. This feature of ARP also means that any host can claim to be the owner of any IP or MAC address. A threat actor can poison the ARP cache of devices on the local network, creating a man-in-the-middle attack to redirect traffic. So ARP cache poisoning can be used to launch various man-in-the-middle attacks. So if PCA requires the MAC address of its default gateway, R1, therefore it sends an ARP request for the gateway address. R1 updates its ARP cache with IP and MAC address of PCA, and then sends an ARP reply to PCA, which then updates its ARP cache with IP and MAC address of R1. The threat actor sends two spoof gratuitous ARP replies using its own MAC address for the indicated destination addresses, so both PCA and the router. And so PCA updates its ARP cache with its default gateway, which is now pointing to the threat actor's host MAC address. R1 also updates its ARP cache with the IP address of PCA pointing to the threat actor's MAC address. The ARP poisoning attack can be passive or active. Passive ARP poisoning is where threat actors steal confidential information. Active ARP poisoning is where threat actors modify data in transit or inject malicious data. Okay, so DNS attacks. So DNS protocol defines an automated service that matches resource names to, such as, a fully qualified domain name with the required numeric address, so of course an IP or IPv4 or IPv6. It includes the format for queries, responses, data, and uses resource records to identify the type of DNS response. Securing DNS is often overlooked. However, it is crucial to the operation of a network and should be secured accordingly. So DNS attacks include DNS open resolver attacks, DNS stealth attacks, DNS domain shadowing attacks, and DNS tunneling attacks. So the open resolver attacks, a DNS open resolver answers queries from clients outside of its administrative domain. These open resolvers are vulnerable to multiple malicious activities described in the table. So DNS cache poisoning attacks, threat actor sends spoofed, falsified resource record information to a DNS resolver to redirect users from legitimate sites to malicious sites. DNS cache poisoning attacks can all be used to inform the DNS resolver to use malicious name server that is providing RR information for malicious activities. So DNS amplification and reflection attacks. And so basically it's denial of service. And so to increase the volume of attacks and to hide the true source of an attack, threat actors send DNS messages to open resolvers using the IP address of a target host. These attacks are possible because the open resolver will respond to queries from anyone asking a question. And then resource utilization attacks. So again, it's a denial of service attack that consumes the resources of the DNS open resolvers. This DOS attack consumes all the available resources to negatively affect the operations of the DNS open resolver. The impact of this attack may require the DNS open resolver to be rebooted or services to be restarted. All right, stealth attacks. To hide their identity, threat actors can use DNS stealth attack techniques described in the table to carry their attack. So fast flux is where they use a technique to hide their phishing and malware delivery sites behind quickly changing network of compromised DNS hosts. The DNS IP addresses are continuously changed within minutes. Botnets often employ fast flux techniques to effectively hide malicious servers from being detected. Double IP flux use the technique to rapidly change the host name to IP address mappings and to also change the authoritative name server. This increases the difficulty of identifying the source of the attack. And then there's domain generation algorithms. And so this malware randomly generates domain names that can be used as rendezvous points to their command and control servers. Okay, domain shadowing attacks basically involves the threat actor gathering domain account credentials in order to silently create multiple subdomains to be used during the attacks. These subdomains typically point to malicious servers without alerting the actual owner of the parent domain. Okay, so tunneling. Threat actors who use DNS tunneling place non-DNS traffic within DNS traffic. This method often circumvents security solutions when a threat actor wishes to communicate with bots inside a protected network or exfiltrate data from the organization. This is how data tunneling works for CNC commands sent to a botnet. The command data is split into multiple encoded chunks. Each chunk is placed into a lower level domain name label of the DNS query. Because there is no response from the local or network DNS for the query, the request is sent to the ISP's recursive DNS servers. The recursive DNS service will forward the query to the threat actor's authoritative name server. The process is repeated until all the queries containing the chunks are sent. When the threat actor's authoritative name server receives the DNS queries from the infected devices, it sends responses for each DNS query, which contain encapsulated encoded CNC commands. The malware on the compromised host recombines the chunks and executes commands hidden within the DNS record. To stop DNS tunneling, the network administrator must use a filter that inspects DNS traffic. Pay close attention to the DNS queries that are longer than average, and for those that have a suspicious domain name. Okay, DNS servers dynamically provide IP configuration information to clients. And so in the figure, a client broadcasts a DHCP discover message after it's booted up typically, at least the DHCP server responds with a unicast offer that includes address information the client can use. The client broadcasts a DHCP request to tell the server that the client accepts the offer. The server then replies with a unicast acknowledgement accepting the offer. So DHCP discover, offer, request, acknowledgement. Now, what attacks are there for DHCP? So there's spoofing attacks. Occurs when a rogue DHCP server is connected to the network and provides false IP configuration parameters to legitimate clients. A rogue server can provide a variety of misleading information. So with the wrong default gateway, it provides an invalid gateway or the IP address of its host to create a man-in-the-middle attack. This may go entirely undetected as the intruder intercepts the data flow through the network. The wrong DNS server, and so it can be pointing to a malicious website. Then the wrong IP address, and so of course, if you get an invalid gateway IP address or both, the threat actor can then create a denial of service attack, so that of course the host that got that address won't be able to talk to the live network. So assume a threat actor has successfully connected a rogue DHCP server to a switch port on the same subnet as the target clients. The goal of the rogue server is to provide clients with false IP information. The client broadcasts a DHCP discover request looking for a response from a DHCP server. Both servers receive the message, so the valid one and the rogue one. The legitimate and rogue DHCP servers each respond with a valid IP configuration. The client replies to the first offer received. The client receives the rogue offer first. It broadcasts a DHCP request accepting the parameters from the rogue server, and the legitimate and rogue server each receive the request. Only the rogue server unicasts a reply to the client to acknowledge its request. The legitimate server stops communicating with the client because the request has already been acknowledged. Okay, so network security best practices. Network security consists of protecting information and information systems from unauthorized access and use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction. Most organizations follow CIA information security triad, so confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So with confidentiality, only authorized individuals, entities, or processes can access sensitive information. May require using cryptographic encryption algorithms such as AES to encrypt and decrypt data. Integrity refers to protecting data from unauthorized alteration, requires the use of cryptographic hashing algorithms such as SHA. And availability, of course, authorized users must have uninterrupted access to important resources and data. It requires implementing redundant services, gateways, and links. Okay, so the defense in depth approach is used to ensure secure communications across both public and private networks. You must secure devices including routers, switches, servers, and hosts. Most organizations employ a defense in depth approach to security. It requires a combination of networking devices and services working together. So several security devices and services are implemented on, so you have VPNs, ASA firewalls, IPS, ESA, WSA, AAA servers. All network devices, including the routers and switches, are hardened. You must also secure data as it travels across various links. Okay, so with firewalls, of course, it's a system or group of systems that enforces an access control policy between networks. And so you allow certain types of traffic, which of course are required for business to happen, and you deny other ones, which are of course risks. So IPS, of course, intrusion prevention systems. You can defend against fast-moving and evolving attacks. You may need cost-effective detection and prevention systems integrated into the entry and exit points of the network. So IDS, of course, is intrusion detection as opposed to prevention, and so they are very similar. And you can actually have both deployed at the same time. So IDS or IPS sensor can be in the form of several different devices. It could be a router configured with iOS IPS. It could be a device specifically designed for the purpose, or it could be a network module installed inside your firewall, switch, or router. So they detect patterns in network traffic using signatures, which is a set of rules that are used to detect malicious activity, and they can detect atomic signature patterns, so single packets, or composite signature patterns, which means you need to watch multiple packets to actually find that match. All right, so the figure shows how an IPS handles denied traffic. So the threat actor sends a packet destined for your target laptop. The IPS intercepts the traffic and evaluates it against known threats and the configured policies, and it sends a log message to the management console, and it also drops the packet. All right, so you've got ESA, which is email security appliance, and you've also got WSA, which is a web security appliance. And so ESA is a special device designed to monitor simple mail transfer protocol. And so it's constantly updated by real-time feeds from Cisco Talos, which is their security center. And the threat intelligence data is pulled by the Cisco ESA every 3 to 5 minutes. With WSA, it's a mitigation technology for web-based threats, combines advanced malware protection, application visibility, and control. and acceptable use policy controls and reporting. It provides complete control over how users access the internet. It can perform blacklisting of URLs or URL filtering, malware scanning, URL categorization, web application filtering, and encryption of web traffic. Cryptography. So basically securing communication. So organizations may provide support to secure the data as it travels across links. This may include internal traffic, but it is even more important to protect the data that travels outside the organization. So the 4 elements of secure communications are data integrity, origin and authentication, data confidentiality, and data non-repudiation. So data integrity guarantees that the message was not altered. Integrity is ensured by implementing either message digest version 5 or MD5 or SHA hash generating algorithms. With origin authentication, guarantees that the message is not a forgery and does come from who it states. Many modern networks ensure authentication with protocols such as hash message authentication code or HMAC. Data confidentiality, of course, is your encryption of your data as it goes across the network, and so you've got symmetric and or asymmetric encryption methods. Data non-repudiation guarantees that the sender cannot repudiate or refute the validity of a message sent, and so it relies on the fact that only the sender has a unique characteristics or signature for how that message is treated. Cryptography can be used almost anywhere that there is data communication. In fact, the trend is toward all communication being encrypted. So data integrity, hash functions are used to ensure the integrity of a message. They guarantee that the message data has not changed accidentally or intentionally. In the figure, the sender is sending $100 money transfer to Alex. The sender wants to ensure that the message is not altered on its way to the receiver. And so the sending device inputs the message into a hashing algorithm and computes a fixed length hash of those characters. This hash is then attached to the message and sent to the receiver. Both the message and the hash are in plain text. Receiving device removes the hash from the message and inputs the message into the same hashing algorithm. The computed hash is equal to the one that is attached to the message. The message has not been altered during transit. If hashes are not equal, then the integrity of the message can no longer be trusted. Okay, so when it comes to hashing functions, the 3 major ones are MD5, SHA, and SHA-2. So MD5 is a 128-bit digest. So it's a one-way function that produces a 128-bit hash message. MD5 is a legacy algorithm that should only be used when no better alternatives are available. SHA-2 is preferred. So SHA is very similar to MD5 hash functions. It creates a 160-bit hashed message and is slightly slower than MD5, but version 1 had some flaws and is deemed to be legacy as well. And so SHA-2 was the preferred. And so, of course, SHA-2 uses longer messages, and so 224, 256, 384, and 512. And so it's next generation and should be used wherever possible. While hashing can be used to detect accidental changes, it cannot be used to guard against deliberate changes. This means that anyone can compute a hash for any data if they have the correct hash function, and they normally will. Therefore, hashing is vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks and does not provide security to transmitted data. All right, so origin authentication. So to add authentication to integrity insurance, use a keyed hash message authentication code, so that HMAC. So it's calculated using any cryptographic algorithm that combines a cryptographic hash function with a secret key. So you need that extra secret key. Only parties who have access to that secret key can compute the digest of the HMAC function. This defeats man-in-the-middle attacks and provides authentication of the data origin. And so because that host knows the secret key that you also know, that is how you authenticate that it's the host it purports to be. Okay, of course, data encryption. There are 2 classes of encryption. These are classes differ in how they use keys. So there's symmetrical, which is more commonly used. And so DES, 3DES, and AES are based on the premise that each communicating party knows the pre-shared key. That's all very nice, but yeah, you've got to have some method of both parties knowing the pre-shared key. That's the problem. But they are a lot more efficient and faster. Data confidentiality can be ensured using asymmetric algorithms, and so there's reverse share-Alderman, or RSA, and public key infrastructure. And so basically with asymmetrical, if you want someone to send something to you, you give them your public key, and only you with the private key can decrypt it. And so that's the beauty of that, is you can give away that public key quite happily, and only you can decrypt it. Now with symmetrical encryption, what it means, why they call it symmetrical, is you use the same key to both encrypt and decrypt the data. That's why they call it symmetrical. So you use the same pre-shared key, also known as the secret key, to encrypt and decrypt data. A pre-shared key is known by the sender and the receiver before an encrypted communications can take place. Symmetric encryption algorithms are commonly used with VPN traffic because they are use less CPU resources than asymmetric. When using symmetric encryption algorithms, the longer the key, the longer it will take for someone to discover the key. To ensure that the encryption is safe, a minimum key length of 128 bits should be used. But when you talk about asymmetrical, the key lengths are much longer. That's probably one of the reasons why they're less efficient. So when it comes to symmetrical, DES has been around for a very long time. And so it's very much legacy. So then someone decided to do 3 DES. So basic's a newer version of DES, but it actually uses the DES algorithm, but it actually does the encryption 3 times. It encrypts it with one key, decrypts it with another, and then encrypts it with another. And so that's why it's called triple DES. It is a bit slower than most things. So AES, or Advanced Encryption Standard, is a secure and more efficient algorithm than 3 DES. And so it's popular and recommended symmetric encryption algorithm. It offers 9 combinations of key and block length by using variable key length from 128 bits up to 256. And so that is a well-liked algorithm. 3 DES is still all right, but because it's been around longer, they still haven't really found any problems with it, and so that's why it's well-liked. AES is thought to be better, but of course, it hasn't been around as long, and so they're not quite as confident. But anyway, then there is software optimized encryption algorithm, or SEAL. It's a faster alternative to symmetric encryption than DES, 3 DES, and AES. Uses 160-bit encryption key and has a lower impact on the CPU. So you're better off having specialized hardware for AES. If you don't have that, SEAL can be quite good. And then there's a whole pile of different ciphers from Mr. Rivest. And so several variations have been developed for, but RC4 is the most prevalent use. The stream cipher is used to secure web traffic and SSL and TLS. Okay, so asymmetrical is called public key algorithms, are designed so that the key that is used for encryption is different from the key that is used for decryption. So they have a mathematical relationship. You just can't pluck 2 numbers and use them. But of course, yeah, so if you encrypt with one of the keys, you need to decrypt with the other one. And so algorithms use a public key and a private key. The complementary paired key is required for decryption. Data encryption with the public key requires the private key to decrypt. Asymmetric algorithms achieve confidentiality, authentication, and integrity by using this process. Because neither party has a shared secret, very long key lengths must be used. And so, yeah, 512 is the shortest as opposed to 128 for AES. And so you're up to 4,000 bits. So, yeah, key lengths greater than or equal to 1,024 can be trusted, while shorter key lengths are less considered unreliable. So examples of asymmetric Internet Key Exchange, or IKE. There's Secure Socket Layer, which is now implemented as IETF standard. And then there is Secure Shell, which of course uses asymmetric as well as symmetric. And Pretty Good Privacy, PGP, again, was another one that used it. So asymmetric algorithms are substantially slower than symmetric algorithms. The design is based on computational problems such as factoring extremely large numbers or computing discrete logarithms of extremely large numbers. Because they are slow, asymmetric algorithms are typically used in low-volume cryptographic mechanisms such as digital signatures and key exchange. So basically, you use an asymmetric encryption system to then send a secret key that you can then share, and then you can use AES. That's typically how it goes. And then, of course, there's Diffie-Hellman. It allows two parties to agree on a key that they can use to encrypt messages they want to send to each other. The security of this algorithm depends on the assumption that it's easy to raise a number to a certain power, but difficult to compute which power was used to given the number and the outcome. And then there's DSS, Digital Signature Standard, and DSA. And so, of course, it's based on Algomal. Then there's RSA, which, of course, we have mentioned. Then there's Algomal, of course, itself, and then there's elliptical curves techniques. So, now, Diffie-Hellman is an asymmetric mathematical algorithm where two computers generate an identical shared key without having communicated before. The new shared key is never actually exchanged between the sender and receiver. So here are three examples of instances DH is commonly used in. So IPsec VPNs, SSL and TLS use it, as well as SSH. So DH uses unbelievably large numbers in its calculations. Unfortunately, asymmetric key systems are extremely slow for any sort of bulk encryption. Therefore, it's common to encrypt the bulk of the traffic using a symmetric algorithm, such as 3DES or AES. Now just use DH to create the keys that will be used in the encryption algorithm. So basically, the colors in the figure will be used instead of numbers to simplify the agreement process. DH key exchange begins with Alice and Bob, so A and B, agreeing on an arbitrary common color that does not need to be kept secret. So, so from there, Alice and Bob will each select a secret color. Alice chose red, and Bob will chose blue. Of course, the secret color represents the chosen secret private key of each party. Alice will now mix the shared common color, yellow, with their respective secret color to reproduce a private color. Therefore, Alice will mix the yellow with her red and to produce a private color of orange. Bob will mix the yellow and the blue to make a private color of green. Alice sends her private color, orange, and Bob sends his private color, green, to Alice. Alice and Bob mix each color they receive with their own original secret color, red for Alice and blue for Bob. The result is a final brown color mixture that is identical to the other's final color mixture. The brown color represents the resulting shared secret key between Bob and Alice. It is very clever. Okay, so that's the end of the chapter, just a summary. So, the network security breaches can disrupt e-commerce, cause the loss of business data, threaten people's privacy, and compromise the integrity of information. Vulnerabilities must be addressed before they become a threat and are exploited. Mitigation techniques are required before, during, and after an attack. An attack vector is a path by which a threat actor can gain access to a server, host, or network. Attack vectors originate from inside or outside the corporate network. The term threat actor includes hackers and any device, person, group, or nation state that is intentionally or unintentionally the source of an attack. Attack tools have become more sophisticated and highly automated. These tools require less technical knowledge to implement. Common types of attacks are eavesdropping, data modification, IP address spoofing, password-based attacks, denial of service, man-in-the-middle, and compromised key and sniffers. Three most common types of malware are worms, viruses, and Trojan horses. Networks are susceptible to the following types of attacks: reconnaissance, access, and denial of service. Types of attacks, access attacks are passwords, spoofing, trust exploitation, port redirections, man-in-the-middle, and buffer overflow. IP attack techniques include ICMP, amplification and reflection, address spoofing, man-in-the-middle, and session hijacking. Threat actors use ICMP for reconnaissance and scanning attacks. They launch information gathering attacks to map out a network topology, discover which hosts are active or reachable, identify the host operating systems, and identify and determine the state of the firewall. Threat actors often use amplification reflection techniques to create denial of service attacks. With TCP attacks, you've got TCP SYN floods, reset attacks, session hijacking, then you've got UDP flooding attacks, often from spoofed hosts to a server on the subnet. Results is very similar to denial of service. Any client can send an unsolicited ARP reply to called a gratuitous ARP. This means that any host can claim to be the owner of any IP or MAC. A threat actor can poison the ARP cache of devices in the local network, creating a man-in-the-middle of attack or redirect traffic. DNS attacks include open resolver attacks, stealth attacks, domain shadowing attacks, tunneling attacks, and to stop DNS tunneling, the network administrator must use a filter that inspects DNS traffic. The DHCP spoof attack occurs when a rogue DHCP server is connected to the network and provides false IP configuration parameters to legitimate clients. Most organizations follow the CIA information security triad, which of course stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. To ensure secure communications across both public and private networks, you must secure devices including routers, switches, servers, and hosts. This is known as defense in depth. A firewall is a system or group of systems that enforces an access control policy between networks. To defend against fast-moving and evolving attacks, you may need an intrusion detection or an intrusion prevention system. 4 elements of secure communications are data integrity, origin authentication, data confidentiality, and data non-repudiation. Hash functions guarantee that the message has not changed accidentally or intentionally. 3 well-known hash functions are MD5, SHA, and SHA-2, but SHA-2 is preferred. To add authentication to integrity insurance, use a keyed hash message algorithm authentication code. So HMAC is calculated using a cryptographic algorithm that combines cryptographic hash function with a secret key. Symmetric encryption algorithms using DES, 3DES, AES, SEAL, and RC are based on the premise that each communicating party knows the pre-shared key. Data confidentiality can be ensured using asymmetric algorithms like RSA and PKI. Diffie-Hellman is an asymmetric mathematical algorithm where the 2 computers generate an identical shared key without having communicated before. And that's the logo. So that's it for chapter 3. And chapter 4, of course, is next. Have a good one. See you later.